Let me just push that up so it deafen everyone in chat. Okay. Yeah, welcome everyone to another stream. This is part 2 of a series of videos that we're making as we to have a quick first looks at the new Vampire the Eternal Struggle 5th edition decks that have just been released. I use release loosely because shipping is apparently a big thing these days, or rather shipping delays is apparently a big thing these days. So if you've got your hands on it, congratulations. Otherwise, just bear with whoever your distributor is. I'm sure they'll get you your product as soon as they can. All right, so today we have again invited John to come talk to us and have a talk through the next deck in the series.
So, yeah, today we'll be looking at the 5th edition Banu Haqim deck.
Yeah. Uh, sorry. It's been 2 weeks. 2 weeks has been a long time. I haven't figured out how to stream, not block. See, I don't even remember what all these words are. Words are difficult. Anyway, uh, yeah, welcome back, John. It's great to have you again. Last time was pretty fun, I think.
Thanks for
And
having me.
yeah, anytime. All right, so um, like John said, today we are talking about the 5th edition Banu Haqim deck that's just been released by Black Chantry Productions. Uh, so just a quick look at what you get out of the box. 12 crypt cards as usual, 10 unique crypt cards for a total of 12 Camarilla vampires. There are 6 different unique title vampires in the deck, bringing the total number of vampires to 8. Lowest capacity is 3, highest capacity is 9, and I think that's the highest capacity among the 4 new decks that Black Chantry has just released. Uh, but the average capacity is still a nice, reasonable 5.5. John, do you want to walk us through the library cards?
Yep, so for the library, we had 15 master cards, 8 action cards, 2 political actions, 1 retainer, 8 combination cards or combo cards, 31 combat cards, that's quite a few, and 12 reactions, bringing us to a total of 77 library cards.
Yeah, so it looks like the deck's pretty. I wouldn't say the average capacity is low, but at least it's pretty reasonable considering that 6 is about the average. Uh, and like you said, it is really heavy on combat cards. Considering the sheer number of titles, I would kind of assume this would be a political deck.
Yeah, there's only 2 political actions, but I find it's a fairly toolboxy kind of loadout they've given you.
Yeah, and it really does make sense, the entire deck. I think I when this deck first came out, I think I was the one who got really excited about it. I got a bit of poo-poo across various channels because if you're new to the Vampire the Eternal Struggle or VtES, Banu Hakim is the new name for an old clan. The old clan used to be called Assamites. So in VtES, they've typically been combat heavy, but not so efficient on payload. Uh, so this new deck does have some pretty interesting cards that's, I think, about to change that perception. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I was definitely one of the people who gave you a bit of poo-poo when the spoilers first came out. Yeah, I overlooked a few cards, but there's certainly some tools they've given the Banu Hakim that really uh turned them on.
Yeah, I think the main one, especially from this deck, is this card here, Hakim's Law Retribution. So just have a quick read of what the card does. Hakim's Law Retribution is a master card that requires Banu Hakim to play. Uh, and it says put this card into play. During a bleed action, a Banu Hakim you control can discard a combat card to get +1 bleed. And I think it's yeah, like I was saying, it really does shake up the what the Banu Hakim can do. It's got, I mean, just on its face value, this is a pretty amazing card. It's got no pool cost. It's not unique, so you can run a whole bunch of it without, worrying about ending up with dead cards in your hand during your master phase. And it's not a location. I mean, that's a minor thing, but sometimes people do pack location hate. It and
Yeah, it's the unique thing is the part that I really overlooked. Plus one bleed, not a big deal, but once you get two, maybe three of these in play, you're pretty consistently bleeding at three
yeah,
bleed.
and it solves the issue with a lot of either like combat decks or even Bruce Bleed decks where you you run out of gas just because you start drawing into all your combat cards. In this case, there isn't a chance of that because your combat cards are essentially gas at the same time.
Yep, they're also your bleed cards.
They are also your blade cards. I think I mentioned before, but this would be a good time to clarify. If you've got old SMI cards and you kind of looking at playing, continuing to improve on them, Banu Hakim and SMItes are at this point, as far as I know, interchangeable. So the Banu Hakim vampires can play and allow you to play SMI cards and vice versa. Uh, you've got a little note here, John, that says Ritual of the Bitter Rose. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, it's a very cute card. I think the main takeaway is this card. Well, the reason you don't play cards like Ritual of the Bitter Rose or uh, what's the other one? The Amaranth. That's also a combat card, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is they get really situational and you don't really get a chance to play them, so they just kind of stick in your hand and you can't get rid of them. But with this Rakim's Law Retribution, yeah, it's no big deal to, chuck them for plus bleed. So why not run a few of those situational cards? It's when you have a non-situational way to play them.
Or janky card, as I like to call them.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But I mean, even not so janky cards like Disguise Weapon, normally you kind of run them in balance with the number of weapons in your deck, but now why not pack more Disguise Weapons just to have a bit more consistency and you can just chuck them for plus bleed when you don't need them anymore.
yeah, that's true. Speaking of chucking them for plus bleed, I think this card also solves a little bit of stealth jam. Well, I mean, in this case, it's only supports two cards, resist Earth's Grasp and Swallowed by the Night. But what it does is essentially uh, you can use stealth cards as uh, bleeding extra bleed just because they're combo cards. Anything that has as is an action mode, sorry, is a combat card, you can, even if it's also something else, you can always use that as gas. But yeah, it's really about sculpting your hand, really about making your deck more consistent. All in all, the best card in the deck by miles, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Alright, the next new card is Hunter's Mark. So Hunter's Mark is an action that requires celerity and Damudaji, and at inferior, it allows one vampire to enter combat with a minion, and the acting vampire gets +1 press, sorry, an optional press during that combat. At superior, it does the same, plus it also stops the opposing minion from playing strike combat ends during the first round of that combat. What do you think, John? Rush cards.
Um, Personally, I prefer rush cards that have alternate ways to play them other than rush. So things like fleetness, which is also in the deck, but this one really gives you a edge in combat, doesn't it?
It does kind of stopping strike combat ends is definitely huge. But at the same time, because they're a celerity clan, the optional press might not really go that far, unless you're looking at maybe second round Walk of Flame, but still.
Sure. And celerity also has psych as a means to get around combat ends, so maybe not as critical this card, but still pretty good as far as rush cards go.
Yeah, I think it's pretty decent. I mean, it's got no drawbacks, right? Like, if you want to play things like Bumps Rush, it comes with like Do Not Replace and all that. Most free, no cost combat cards tend to have that. And this is basically just a straight out, no strings attached, enter combat. It's okay. So I've got a little note here talking about priority contract. This is also a card that's also in the deck. It is a reprint of an old card. It basically also allows you to rush, but you know, compared to Hunter's Mark, this one's got a lot of restrictions. It's a master card. You can only play it during your master phase. You can only target your prey, and only one SMI is or Banu Hakim is can be targeted at any one time. The three pool's nice, but all in all, just looking at it, Hunter's Mark without any strings attached, I would play that anytime.
Fair enough.
The next new card is a combat card. You want to talk us through Hunger of Marduk, John?
Hunger of Marduk. Only usable before range, and then this right at inferior. This it's at Thaumaturgy and Banu Haqim. So um, the old Assamites, not many can play it, but it works fine just with the crypt that comes in the deck. At inferior, this round can strike, range, steal one blood or life, becoming blood. And at superior, it's this as above, but for two blood or life.
Sounds like it kind of sounds really similar to the
Theft.
old Thaumaturgy Theft of Vitae, yeah. But this is interesting. I was reading the rules forums a little bit, and people were asking, interactions between cards like this and cards that restrict or stop you from playing strike cards. This is actually not a strike card, so it works around anything that says you can't play strike cards or you know,
Cancel a strike card.
yeah, cancel a strike card, whatever. And it actually works pretty well with Banu Hakim specifically because of celerity. Because what it does is, unlike Theft of Vitae, which is like, you play one, it strikes for whatever and then it's done. It This allows you play this before range is determined, and then it allows you to do it multiple times as long as you can generate additional strikes.
Pretty cute.
Yeah. Uh,
I mean, theft was already a good card, so this is basically theft with a few extra options.
I have to say though, I initially misread the card and thought it was a lot better than what it actually is. It until you pointed out that it says this round, so you kind of have to have one copy every round as opposed to play one and then just go crazy with the rest of the combat as long as you've got press.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. You
yeah,
can't exactly play this and then trap or something.
yeah, you can't. Which is why I kind of looked at um Hunter's Mark. I was like, yeah, the optional press doesn't really work with this card. Like, I mean, it still works if you have another copy, but it doesn't inherently just work with if you've got this card in hand.
I mean, ultimately, theft I saw play before, and this is basically theft but better.
Death on steroids.
Yep.
Yeah. Uh, there is another showcase card in the deck. It's quickness. I think we covered this in the previous stream when we talked about the Bruja deck. It's not new, but it's again worth highlighting.
It's free.
Yeah, free additional strike is at inferior is good. I think it's the only one like you mentioned before.
Yep.
Yeah. So what do you think of the new library cards so far? I think I can
Uh,
get pretty excited about it.
I mean, Hakim's Law Retribution is the one to get excited about, really.
Yeah, it's really what's going to. I think it's going to really change up how people are going to play Asimite or Banu Hakim decks. It'll be interesting to see.
What's great about it is it doesn't only open up one archetype. It it lets you play a few different archetypes. Like you can do a bruise bleed, which is basically what the obvious way to play it. But even stealth bleed lets you run loads of swallowed by the night or resistance graphs.
Yeah,
Um, Toolbox definitely, which is what the deck does out of the box. So yeah, I like it because it opens up more than one deck archetype. I think.
for sure. Well, we'll come back to um, you know, new deck archetypes in a bit. Let's have a quick look at the new Crypt Cards.
Let's.
So we've got a new Justica. Um, Obviously, this means that the Banu Hakim or the Asamites have now become Camarilla. They used to be an independent clan. Uh, I mean, with bits and pieces everywhere, but it looks like from the new storyline, they have completely folded into the Camarilla sect, and Kasim Baya, I think that's how you meant to pronounce his name, is the new 9 cap Camarilla Justica for Banu Hakim. He has inferior odd specs, inferior potence, superior celerity, superior obfuscate, and superior thaumaturgy. And once each combat, Kasim can discard a political action card before range is determined to get +2 strength that combat. He also has +1 bleed. Uh well, the one obvious thing is no more blood curse. It's a minor thing, but it's nice to not have to explain what blood curse is to newer
Hmm.
players.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a Justica, right? 9 cap Justica. It's a lot of votes. Plus he's got a +1 bleed. Really, what's not to like here?
Yep. I mean, he's overall pretty good. If you want the votes, he's worth it.
Yeah. Uh, I think his text, just because of the way the deck works, might be a little bit situational. It feels to me within the deck itself, at least, like a backup. Like if you don't draw um Hunger of Maduk, you get he at least gives you some options. Although with only 2 political cards in the deck.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. In this deck, out of the box, his text doesn't do a whole lot. But I think it it lines him up nicely to work as a kind of a superstar kind of vampire where you build with the deck in mind that okay, he's going to have +2 strength and he's going to call votes. And
Yeah,
maybe you don't. The thing is you when you craft your combat package around an ability like that, then your other vamps aren't going to work as well.
fair enough. Uh, yeah. So speaking of votes, this new deck has got 3 new princes. You've got Wamak's son at 5 cap, Cassandra Tasaki at 6 cap, and Farah Sarop at 7 cap. Uh, It's
relatively cheap princes.
yeah. I think five caps is the cheapest prince we've got now. The other two five caps have got drawbacks, so he's yeah the first five cap prince without drawbacks. Also interesting to note is two of the cities are new, so you're not going to contest anytime soon. Although I suspect we might see more princes or archbishops or barons of these cities sometime down the line.
Yep. I mean, when you look at the capacities 5, 6, 7, and then a Justicar at 9, not many clans can boast that kind of lineup. I think only Bruja have a similar kind of, you know, low capacity set of princes.
Yeah, it definitely like gives you the opportunity to go fast out of the gate and start voting. Especially since you know the Banu Hakim don't really have superior vote push disciplines. So cheap princes definitely a way to go.
Yep.
Plus you get some defense, right? With cheap print, like early defense with second traditions and whatnot.
Yes, second tradition is a thing.
It is a thing. The next script card I like to talk about is not really a new card. It is new. It is a well, not functional. I guess reversioning similar to Theobald from the Bruja deck. It's Kalinda. She is a 6 cap Camera Primogen with inferior thaumaturgy, superior celerity, and superior obfuscate. And once during your turn, you can burn the age to unlock Kalinda. So she was in Ancient Hearts way back in the 90s. But yeah,
Yeah, definitely got an art upgrade.
the art looks nicer for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. There's not really much opportunity to multi-act really out of the box. But if you build your deck around something more toolboxy, like you mentioned before, she can definitely do a lot of hit the heavy lifting for all the extra actions that you might have. Primogen's also not too bad a title, I think. Don't have much Primogens in this deck, but there are some new Primogen toys that have just came out in the last cycle of 5th edition deck boxes. So all in all, I think she's a pretty good reversioning. Fits
Mm-hmm.
the deck well. Yeah. So what do you think of the new Crypt Cards?
Uh, I think it's a good crypt. You get a lot of variety, and it's a great starting point for, uh,
For just so
like I
many
said,
things, basically.
yeah. So for so many things, you can tweak upwards or downwards or left, right, whatever, um, or just use it as is. I think as a toolbox, it's a fine crypt.
Yeah, it really, like the entire thing just kind of makes sense, honestly.
Yep.
Having said that, I think there are a couple of cards that I might consider adding. From a crypt perspective, I don't know, I think it's pretty good as it is. You don't really have, you know, much to go. No matter what strategy you choose, whether to, Bruce Bleed and then, chuck in the occasional parity shift, or um, even playing something more defensive with wakes and blocks. There's nothing there isn't really much options outside of this deck for the Banu Hakim, even if you bring in the old Assamites.
Yeah. The new discipline spread really kind of limits you to use only the new stuff, because the new ones don't have quitus and the old ones don't have thaumaturgy. So, but I think as a starter set, as a starting point, I think it's a great crypt. You can, like I said, you can, if you want to go more into votes, you can double up on your princes, or maybe you can double up on your younger vamps if you're going for more of a blue bleed kind of style. Maybe you don't need the older vamps like the Justica.
So what would you recommend then in terms of upgrading the deck?
What would I recommend in terms of upgrading the deck?
What
Right,
would
so
you cut
what would I
first up?
cut?
Yeah, what would you take out of the deck? I mean, personally, I would remove priority contact. I mentioned that before. It's too restrictive, and honestly, you've got so many better rush options. The three pull is a little bit if you ask me, sometimes, for the effort that you're going through. So I'll definitely,
Yeah, I think I yeah, my favorite way to rush is always backwards. So rushing forwards isn't that much of an appeal to me.
yeah. Plus, with Hakim's Law Retribution being such a big part of the new design of gameplay for Banu Hakim, having another master card that sort of fights for that one master card space, even though it's a trifle, it's not really a good idea, I
Hmm.
feel. Yeah. And then I think I would generally take out cards like Blood Rage and Soul Burn. I mean, they're good cards, they're combat cards, you can cycle them with Hakim's Law, but really combat wise, it's just Hunger of Marduk, theft, and then I mean steal blood, and then just maybe do a quick punch to get people into topo, or ultimately if you steal enough blood, people kind of just get off your way anyway.
I mean, in a deck where you're not cycling combat cards as easily, like Soulburn and Blood Rage, they're the kind of cards where they have that really corner case situation where you want to play them. It's like, okay, I'm up against a guy with an AK-47. Let's play
Soulburn.
Soulburn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and but that situation doesn't come up all too often, at least in our our meta. So um,
I mean, also with celerity, you kind of have access to dodge and the occasional strike combat ends.
sure. I guess my point is it kind of fits into the same category as
Ritual of the Bitter
Ritual
Rose.
of the Bitter Rose. Yeah.
Ooh. But yeah, yeah, I would take them out. Just anything else really. I feel. They're cute, but
Yeah, I wouldn't fault you for taking them out.
the other card I kind of want to talk about removing is Hunter's Mark. Like I think it's a decent enough card, and like was mentioned before, it's pretty alright as a rush. But I feel personally it kind of lacks flexibility. It does one thing, basically,
Yes.
right?
Right. It
And
does one thing, it does it well, but yeah,
yeah,
if you don't want to do that one thing.
especially in the toolboxy deck, there's a good chance, you pull this and then you don't really want to rush anything at the moment. It kind of sits around.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can cycle it with retribution either. I mean, compared to like
Mm,
fleetness, which at least gives you a bleed at stealth,
yep.
and plus fleetness already is already in the deck, so you don't really need more of it. Just go forward, man. That's what the Hakim's Law retribution is for.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So, like you mentioned, there's like a whole bunch of good decks that you can use this starter box as a starting point for. Um, I think generally there are a handful of cards that you would want to throw in if you can make the space for it. Uh, One of the ones that you mentioned recently, and I thought was a good idea, is Flurry of Action. Uh,
Yep. Uh, well, how about we backtrack a bit um, about Hakim's Law Judgment,
Judgment,
um,
Retribution.
Retribution. Yes.
Yes, words are
Um,
hard.
Words are hard. They give you four in the deck, which I think is a good number if you're running a toolboxy. But if you want to go heavier into you know combat bruise bleed kind of uh, loadout, you're going to want to run maybe six-ish. I would, but the problem then becomes what happens when you get two or three in your hand. You can't. They take a while to get rid of.
Yeah, they don't cycle into themselves. If only they did.
Indeed. So that's where Flurry of Ashen comes in. Um, the thing about this deck is, besides fleetness, you're bleeding just by tapping, right? So it's not like there's an opportunity cost to playing Flurry of Action. Um, so just play it, I guess, if you have the room. That inferior, it lets you draw two cards and discard back down. So that's a handy tool for getting rid of your whatever jam you might have, right?
Yep. And it's nice that
And that
it's this draw first before discard, so you kind of have you get more information before needing to discard, as opposed to cards like the Barons where you are essentially discarding blind because you don't know what is going to replace it. It could be better, it could be worse, right?
indeed. And at superior, it's multi-action, so that's
Yeah,
also good.
multi-action is always good. Can't ever complain about multi-action.
What's next?
Next up is a card that I personally like, but I think not many people like to run because of the blood cost. It's Torrent. At inferior, it's basically a two blood cost quickness, which is not great. But at superior, it allows you to strike combat ends, and then if you are performing an action, that action continues as if unblocked. I think it's pretty great if you, I mean, by itself, two blood for a combat ends continue action card effect isn't really that great. But if you think about how the Banu Hakim has access to celerity stealth and especially obfuscate stealth, um, and we'll also talk a little bit later about Mastercard stealth. It does give you a pretty decent chance to land that action um, that you continue as if unblocked, especially in a meta that's heavy on not wakes but cards like Second Tradition or what's that new Anarch card? The Protected District, I think.
That's the Primogen card, isn't it?
Oh, the other one, something defenses, organized defense, organized resistance. There we go.
That's the
I
one.
I definitely did my research for this stream. Totally. Yeah, so in a meta that's heavy on unlock and block, yeah, going into combat just to lock the other guy, and then continuing the action at two stealth or even more is is if nothing else, you trade your one combat card for maybe a handful of other um, intercept cards, and that could potentially mean your subsequent actions are successful if nothing else. I think also with additional celerity having access to additional strikes, you can kind of steal blood on your first strike, and steal two blood, and then use that two stolen blood for to effectively play this for free.
Sure.
And
I
yeah,
mean, action continues is just a good effect, um, especially if it's backed up with a bit of stealth.
yeah, I like this card. I think it goes into. I mean, if you've got space, I think it easily goes into any new Banu Hakim deck. Although to be fair, I wouldn't say chuck 10 in, maybe two or three.
Sounds like a good number to me.
Yeah. Next up, we have Nest of Eagles.
Nest of Eagles. This was your idea, so why don't you sell me on it?
All right, so I mean, essentially, this has been since it's came out. This has been the Asmite or Banu Hakim's way of bleed defense because they don't have access to um, bounce effects other than that one lost in translation. But then with a crypt average crypt of 5.5, you may not necessarily have a vampire that's old enough to, play Lost in Translation. Nest of Eagles, uh, it's a lot of text, but basically what it does is it reduces the bleed against you by one, or if it's a younger vampire, as a young vampire capacity 5 or less, or the acting minion is an ally, you reduce the bleed by 3. Uh, I think personally this is in the late game, or especially if you're facing off against decks with bigger vampires, reducing a bleed by one isn't really that great. But in the early game, especially with the Malkavian deck that just came out, low capacity, obfuscate, uh, dominate, so that's high bleed at stealth. The ability to reduce the early bleeds by 3, I think it's pretty decent. It's worth putting it in. Plus, now you have access to cards like Second Tradition. It's kind of one of those make your predator work hard to land that bleed and then reduce it down to basically nothing if possible. I like it just because of the bleed reduction, or or rather, I like it just because the Banu Hakim don't have any other better option.
I mean, now they have second editions. That sounds like a better option to me.
I would run both,
You
like
would
more
run
second
both.
traditions, but a handful of Nest of Eagles, just for the clutch.
All right.
You don't sound convinced.
I'm not. I'm not.
Fair enough. All right,
So,
next up is
next
a
up,
card that you have been excited about. So take it away, John.
yep. So the card is Alamut. It's a unique location, costs one pool. After an Azamite you control, or in this case, Banu Hakim you control, successfully bleeds Methuselah, the pool lost by that Methuselah is put on this card, and you can burn X from this card during a polling step to gain X votes. So previously, before this new set of cards came out, the Azamites weren't the strongest of bleeders. They had loss, and that was pretty much it. And you didn't see loss a whole lot.
Yeah,
Um,
understatement of the year, that one.
yeah. So this card never really had much of a way to get fueled. But now I think with Hakim's Law Retribution, that's what it's called, right? It's Retribution.
Yeah,
Really?
retribution.
Um, I think this thing can really rack up the votes quick. The thing you need to be, I mean, I think the thing you need to be careful of is you don't think of it as a vote push because the Batu Hakim don't have a whole lot of multi-action, so it's not like you can be bleeding and voting at the same time and be fully effective. I look at this as more of a vote defense. So you you push forward with your dudes, maybe get 4 or 5 counters on this thing, and that should be enough to you know uh, delay a vote or two.
So you're saying that use this as vote defense, basically,
Yep,
or leverage.
or leverage. Yeah, I mean the deck comes with, as we said, plenty of princes, great princes. Um, so even when you're not calling votes yourself, between your princes and this, you can pretty much call, be the deciding factor on a lot of votes. So if even if you're not the voter, someone else on the table is a voter. you might get a point or two out of KRC now and then.
Fair enough. I mean, personally, I think chalk this up to bad experience running the card. I'm not really that sold. Uh, this is like, you know, Nest of Eagles is what is to you. It's like, cool. It does stuff, but not 100% sold on it.
Fair
I,
enough.
I, I guess, yeah, you have a good point. With the new deck, maybe it's time for Alamo to shine a little bit. Um, you, I think it remains to be seen, but I'll definitely give it a go. Just maybe the one copy or
Oh, definitely only one.
yeah,
Master slots are
reserved for Hakim's Law Retribution, basically.
exactly. Yep.
All right, so you mentioned before that this deck is a pretty good starting point for a whole bunch of different archetypes. Uh,
Right.
yeah, so I think the main one you mentioned, and you said it was a pretty obvious one, is Bruce Bleed um, or even Stealth Bleed. I think there's a case to be made here to just run Bruce Bleed with Stealth support. Going full Stealth Bleed is a little bit tricky with Hakim's Law Retribution.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe someone can, come up with something that's a full Stealth Bleed, but yeah, I would definitely push towards the Bruce
I mean,
Bleed.
for a full stealth bleed, I'd be looking at running like 20 or so copies of Swallowed by the Night.
Yeah, that could work. Play one for Stealth, and then everything else as Bleed.
Yep.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, so for Bruce Bleed, I think I would basically add cards like Sight Sleep. So if you've got superior celerity, preventing one damage is good. It lets you work around cards like Claws of the Dead or Chiroptera Marauder. Basically anything that does 1 point of aggravated damage. That way
Ivory
you
bow.
yeah, Ivory Bows, definitely. Because that way you don't have to spend your oh entire round or half a round of combat just dodging. So you can still get something in and still come out unscathed the other side, ideally.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think another, well, I'll talk about the next card,
Yeah.
Flames of the Netherworld, right?
Yep.
I can see why they didn't put this in this product and they put in Walk of Flame instead. That's what they put in, right?
Yes.
This card is actually a Daimonion card. Is that what it is?
I think that's what it's called. Yes.
But at Outferior, you can only use at long range, burn one blood to strike at one ranged aggravated damage. So the main selling point of this thing is you can play it on turn one, and with Obfuscate, Celerity, and Thaumaturgy, there's plenty of maneuver options. Um, one of the I think one of the main things about playing a Bruise Bleed is they have to be afraid to block. You have you have to have something to scare them off with. Otherwise, like, oh, you're gonna steal to my blood. Okay, I guess I can block this. I can take two blood. But if there's always the risk of one aggravated damage, they have to be ready. They have to be on their toes.
They have to have Sight Slip. It's superior.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely. You know, there is a difference between I have 6 blood on my vampire. Sure, I'll jump in the way, maybe lose 2 blood and get punched for one, as opposed to if I jump in the way, I might just go to Topo. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely this would be a card I would run. Um, but having said that, like you mentioned before, some stealth to the deck can't hurt. Cards like, couple of copies of Spying Missions to eventually increase your bleed. cards like Into Thin Air. I mean, I don't really like the Do Not Replace, but the additional text um, that is got above Lost in Crowds, I think it's worth it. Plus, I think you're cycling enough cards that maybe that one less card in your hand isn't that big a deal. I wouldn't run too many of these though. Um, Definitely,
I
I
think
would. Sorry.
yeah.
Yep, you go.
I, g- I mean, you mentioned spying mission was for increasing your bleed later, but for me, it's more about being responsible, right? When you're a bruised bleeder, often if your prey can bounce, you're then breeding your grand prey at 0 stealth. So I think turning that to 0 bleed is that's what it's there for.
Yeah, I don't believe in responsible bleeding. I mean, someone has to die eventually. Eh. But yeah, fair enough. I get your point. Uh, I'll also definitely run Veiled Allegiance just because with Hakim's Law Retribution, you want to maximize your combat cards to everything else ratio. And Field Allegiance, if you've got big enough amps, maybe a 7 caps, or if you're still running your 9 cap, granting free stealth across the next few actions is definitely something um, worth. It reduces the number of stealth cards that you have to run to get your stealth package through. Uh,
Yeah, I can dig it.
yeah, so I think this affects something similar to the Kabar community. So the Kabar
Hmm.
community is a unique master card that costs 2 pull. You put it into play, and Esmites can bleed at, or sorry, right, rather Banu Hakim can bleed at +1 stealth. There's a burn clause on it, but from experience, I think not many people get too excited about a card like Kabar community to actually want to burn it on site. It's no
Sure.
man. I mean, it's no madness network, right?
It's not Madness Network, but yeah, it is pretty pricey to pull, and it's a master slot.
I'll run
So
one.
I think it's worth running one. Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty pricey at 2 pull for sure. All right, so the other deck archetype you were talking about building into is Toolboxy. Um, Considering that this deck only has 2 political actions, I think it's 2 copies of Parity Shift.
Yep.
I would definitely say if you want to go Toolboxy, just chuck in a few copies at least of the usual suspects for political actions. You've mentioned here in notes cards like Kind Resources Contested, cards like Conservative Agitation. I think there's even a case to be made for just a couple more parity shifts.
Yeah, one or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's pool game, right?
It's yeah. The thing about parity shifts has always been uh the the requirements you need to play it.
Yeah, but it isn't too bad since Banu Hakim don't have pool game really, and
Yeah.
they also don't have bounce. So chances of you being low pool pretty high, especially
Fair enough.
yeah. You've got old friends here, so quick
Hang on, Old Friends
question.
was your idea.
Old friends was my idea, nah? Was it? Because oh yeah, I think I wanted to say old friends would be great in basically any deck for Banu Hakim, but you were saying this pretty much only works if you're leaning towards political actions.
Right, because at Superior you get +2 votes as a action modifier, so you can only play it at Superior if you're calling the vote yourself. So at Inferior, it's +1 bleed, which is nifty for obfuscate, but uh, you
Again,
know,
Hakim's Law,
Hakim's Law.
Retribution.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
So
alright, fair enough. It is. I think it's the only way the Banu Hakim can get extra votes in from action modifiers. Oh wait, bribes aside, but yeah, extra votes with no strings attached, I would say.
I'm sure there's a
Y-
couple disciplineless ones out there, but they don't see a whole lot of play.
Yeah, no, bribes doesn't count as no strings attached. Uh, but Mastercards, I think they've got a couple of options now that they've joined Camarilla. They've got the Elysium, the Palace of Versailles. Is that how you
Mm-hmm.
pronounce it? Versailles? Uh,
Uh,
I don't know. I know it's not Versailles, but I think it's Palace of Versailles. Yeah, so this allows you to lock to give additional votes to Camarilla vampires, and um, the Banu Hakim or Esamites also have access to the Black Throne, which is a location with a lot of text, but essentially you just want to play it for the ability to lock to give +2 votes. I personally like the Black Throne, um, even as vote defense, just because that 2 votes goes to you, not any of your vampires, so they can't be cancelled with cards that cancel votes from vampire. And if your vampires are forced to abstain, you still get the 2 votes.
yep, that one pool is a fine location.
Yeah, the contracting, I mean, you have to build it around that. I I don't think that comes
I
up
mean,
much.
yeah, even if you ignore the whole everything after the first sentence, it's fine.
Fair enough. And I think this last deck archetype was a bit of my idea, and then
Ran with it.
you ran with it. Um, breed and bleed, basically. So you now kind of have the option, having joined the Camarilla, not only do you still have access to the Web of Knives recruit, you get access to third tradition progeny as well. Uh, I would personally run a combination of both, just because although progeny comes out faster, the weaponized recruit I think takes like 3 or 4 turns before they hit the what is that region called? The Radi region? Radi region, right?
Hmm.
Yes. I know VtES. Yeah, it takes them a while. But they do come into play as a fully decked out, 3 capacity vampire.
With
So
blood.
with blood. So I would run third tradition just to, have some initial velocity, um, so that you're not just waiting around for your Web of Knife recruits to do stuff. Also, the progeny can recruit Web of Knives recruits.
Nifty.
Yeah, so that combination of both would definitely speed your entire game plan up.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Uh,
I like the progeny because it gives you some flexibility with disciplines. If you're actually using the discipline search part of it, um, it opens up some handy dandy combat options.
yeah. It also means that, being able to search your deck for discipline essentially removes a master card from your library, and that prevents you from accidentally drawing into it when you're happily cycling your combat cards for bleeds.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good. There's
I mean, if it's
also,
if it's in if the master card's in your hand, you can chuck it down as well.
yeah, I was gonna say you can just give the random Web of Knife recruit extra whatever discipline that is that you're running. Um,
Yep.
and then of course the usual breed deck shenanigans, tribute to the master for pool gain. Um, you put down Hakim's Law Leadership question mark.
I mean, it's basically art scam, right? And art scam sees play in breed decks.
Yeah, definitely. There is the outside chance that someone would play a 10 capacity Banu Hakim, so that is something that you might want to have a quick think about when playing the deck, when putting this card into the deck.
Yeah, um, before these new cards came out, it was pretty safe to say you might be the only one playing Banu Hakim or Azamites, as it were. Um, we've yet to see what the meta unfolds as. So yeah, you might not be the only one playing Banu Hakim for much longer.
Uh, yeah, and the rest of it is basically just stealth, right? Helping your low progenies and your recruits get through. So cards like View the Legions, Kabar Community. uh, so giving them stealth without them having to, without worrying about whether your progenies or recruits have the right discipline is always a plus.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what do you think about the deck all in all, and the future of Esmite slash Banu Hakim in VtES?
I think it makes a lot of sense uh, how they've built the deck for you. I mean, as a kind of toolboxy that can do a bit of everything, it serves as a great starting point for whatever you want to kind of mold it into.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised how, what's the word for it? Coherent, I guess is the word for it. This deck is just straight out of the box. So sometimes, I mean, historically there have been some decks that don't quite make sense out of the box. Six deflections in a starter, for example,
Back in the olden days.
back in the olden days. But yeah, so like you say, when the announcement first came out for the Banu Hakim and the spoilers first came out, you were poo-pooing a little bit. Has your mind been changed since?
Yeah, just preparing for this little episode, rereading Hakim's Law Retribution, um, it really opens the door for them. I'm excited.
That is good to hear. Well, I think we've come to the end of today's stream. Thank you very much for joining us again, John.
Thanks for having me again.
It. So hopefully, if you're watching this, you found this review or first look or whatever you want to call it helpful. And yeah, let me know if you think we've missed anything or if there's anything that you would be keen to see or hear more of.
You know
Yeah,
what you didn't talk about?
what did I not talk about?
Magic of the Smith.
Yeah, but you know, cuts that require too much text. Another
Okay,
episode. Yeah.
another episode then.
What's the correct way to say this? Join us next time when we talk about Magic of the Smith and helicopters and Ruthless Hand. Anyway,
You have to
yeah,
go through the like, comment, subscribe, hit
yeah, the
the.
like hit the little bell.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, once again, thanks, John, and until next time, see ya.
See ya.